Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to United Women Singapore's inaugural Dialogue with Diplomats. We're very pleased to have you here, and in particular, we're very honored to have both Her Excellencies Lynn McDonald, High Commissioner, Canada High Commissioner to Singapore, as well as Joe Tyndall, New Zealand High Commissioner to Singapore, for our inaugural session. Thank you all for taking the time this afternoon to be with us, as I'm sure you will enjoy an engaging and very interesting fireside chat. Let me first introduce our two panelists. Let me start with Her Excellency Joe Tyndall. Jo began her career as a multilateral trade policy specialist with the New Zealand Department of Trade and Industry. And she was also with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade, as well as the Ministry of Culture and Heritage. That's quite a pedigree, Jo. She co-chaired the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change Ad Hoc Working Committee on the Paris Agreement, and most recently was New Zealand's Climate Change Ambassador, where she headed the delegation to the UN climate negotiations with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Clearly, Jo's our expert and our guru when it comes to all things climate, sustainability, and climate change, certainly. Allow me now to introduce Her Excellency Lynn McDonald. Lynn started her career at the Global Affairs Canada office, where she worked in the Legal Bureau, the Trade Law Bureau, and the Trade Policy Bureau. She also served as director of the Intellectual Property Trade Policy Division, where she oversaw the negotiation of the intellectual property provisions of Canada's bilateral and multilateral trade. Prior to taking up this post as head of mission here in Singapore, Lynn held positions in Switzerland, the US, and Hong Kong. Jo, Lynn, welcome. Such a delight to have you here with us. So let's get started. We clearly, as heads of mission, these are high stress roles, high profile roles, and I'm not sure if everybody knows how you got in. So let me start by having Jo first. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your path to this position and how you got started. Was this in fact something that you sought to do right at the start?
Unfortunately, I'm probably not a very good role model for young women, and that my career has been defined by serendipity rather than very careful and long-term ahead planning. Very much it's been a case of taking opportunities that have arisen. Getting to where I am now, I think was probably a reward for many, many years working in multilateral negotiations, where my view is that the key criteria that you need for the job are patience and stamina, because they're slow-moving, glacial kind of things, which involve a tortuous process of trying to gradually build consensus and build bridges over a period of time. So yes, I have taken opportunities. I was particularly keen on the idea of the climate change role, but never thought it would be offered to me. it was quite a surprise. I was not working within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade at the time. So to be offered the job was a bit of a dream come true. And I really wanted to take that opportunity to get in. I think it's because, somebody had belief in me, had believed I did have that patience and stamina, and was pleased to have that sponsor, a male sponsor, help me into the position.
Did you actually ever imagine that, you would actually end up here in Singapore in this role, in clearly what is predominantly, traditionally a male-dominated space?
I really wanted a posting. I'm unlike Lynn in some ways. I haven't had a traditional diplomatic career in that I've been in and out of the diplomatic service. And when I spent nearly, it was 8 years as climate change ambassador, never out of planes. This is so ironic these days. Never out of planes or airports and always in meetings. I really wanted a bilateral posting to round out my experience and to, instead of going in depth into a particular subject area, go in depth in terms of a particular bilateral relationship. And I love the opportunity Singapore has given me. It wasn't expected, but what I love is the huge variety that every day brings, and the necessity to have at least a little bit of knowledge about a very, very wide range of subjects in order to be able to do the job effectively.
Absolutely. I've just gotten word that Lynn's been having some technical issues at their end, so she's not actually in our chat right now. But she will join.
Talking to me.
So why don't we carry on our conversation right now, Jo? So let me segue, because, talking about leadership, and I love that what you said, it's about patience and stamina. Clearly, two things that you've identified you needed to have, clearly. But at the same time, you also talked about having male allies, male mentorship, people looking out for you and clearly clearing the path for you. Right, to get you to where you are today. So on this topic of leadership, and we all know that in the case of New Zealand, you don't just have one current icon for a female leader, but you've had a series of female icons and in leadership positions. Can you speak to that, and how has that made a difference?
Well, I think it has made a difference in terms of the demonstration effect. I think there's no doubt that having one female prime minister was great, but by this stage we're now on to our third. Mm-hmm. So it's not a fluke. It's not something that is an aberration. We can prove that not only with the Prime Minister role, but a number of other senior political and official and business roles, there are role models that young women can look up to and can see with confidence that this is something they can aspire to do, and can certainly do so. I think our current Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, has made no secret of the fact that one of her predecessors, Helen Clark, who went on to run the UN Development Programme, that Helen Clark was a mentor, a role model for her, and really helped her believe that she had a career in politics, which she's obviously shone at in the recent years.
Speaking of role models, can you share your own path and the role models that you had along the way, and then maybe segue into mentorship if that was the case?
That's an interesting one, because I was reflecting back. At the time, I was working on the multilateral trade negotiations, which is a lifetime ago now. It was very, very male dominated. And my role models there were my peers. So as it happened, there were 4 of us young women at fairly early stages in our career who were all posted to Geneva at the same time to work on the Uruguay-Round negotiations. So I was from New Zealand. My Canadian, American and Australian counterparts were virtually the only other women in the whole process. We forged a bit of an alliance. We helped and supported each other. There were times at which we were treated in ways that these days I think would be considered unacceptable, in terms of being a little bit bullied, if you like. There was one male negotiator who will remain nameless who referred to us as the 4 witches. So, I mean, that was meant to be a joke, but nonetheless, I think there was a definite attempt to kind of put us in a bit of a box. So we found strength in each other. We were forging new directions within the trade negotiations and in areas like trade and services that, were new frontiers for the WTO at that stage to get into. I mean, this is now going back to the late 1980s, early 1990s. The 4 of us are still friends.
That's
we
fabulous.
Still regularly get together by Zoom calls these days, and catch up with each other. To me, those women friends were hugely important formative role models, and who were going through the same sort of experience at the same time I was. In terms of men, I think that there have been, when I was posted in Geneva, there were there was one person there, a little more senior to me, who was a real mentor, a hugely intelligent trade negotiator, formidable trade negotiator, who gave a lot of his time to work with me, both professionally and giving, sort of being there as a personal friend and colleague. And I feel deeply grateful for the wisdom he passed on. And the second one, who was also there at the same time, ended up being Trade Minister and Climate Change Minister for New Zealand. He was the one who encouraged me to apply for the climate change role. And off the strength of having seen the patience and stamina I demonstrated over those years in Geneva. And again, I think we worked very, very well and in a complementary way to each other. But I appreciated enormously the opportunity that he essentially gave to me to take on a leadership position in the climate change role. There's probably others as well that you know, by getting to work as the co-chair of the APA, the Ad Hoc Working Group on the Paris Agreement, much easier to call it the APA, that was a position to which I was elected, but it was essentially my male peers who encouraged me to put my name forward for that role. Something I was really nervous about. It is incredibly nerve-wracking to sit out on a podium and try to chair a meeting of, you know, with 190 countries represented in the room, when you know that there will be a fair number of them who will be trying to divert the process, trying to block progress, trying to achieve their own ends in ways that that have to be extremely carefully managed. So to have male supporters who believed in my ability to take on that challenge helped me to do so, to pick up the challenge and run with it.
Absolutely. Well, we have Lynn. She's able to join us. Welcome, Lynn. Delighted to have you here. You missed the intro of yourself for yourself, but I think everybody else knows that you're here now. So thrilled to have you with us. I'm going to start off asking you a couple of the questions that I asked Joe earlier, which is really, again, you know, both of you are in this high profile, high stress roles. You both juggle, you know, all these different portfolios: trade, commerce, cultural, philanthropic, you know, different portfolios of obviously looking after the citizens of your country. How do you manage all that? How do you compartmentalize? And more importantly, also, how did you get there? And did you think did you always plan to have this as part of your path?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Georgette and the team, for the invitation. Hi, Joe. It's a privilege to be on a panel with you. And my apologies. The best laid plans sometimes, you know, don't fall into place when it comes to technology. And so, anyway, sorry for
now. That's all that counts.
Joining you. But I was able to hear the beginning, and I have to say, in a sense, I'm going to echo Joe, because it was serendipitous as well for me in terms of how I arrived in this part. I started off with always a base level interest in sort of international relations affairs, probably stemming from having parents who were very much sort of outward facing in terms of interactions with my mom, first generation immigrant to Canada, you know, always sort of reaching out to meet and new people, to take us traveling, to push us, you know, to be kind of independent and see the world. So that started off, and then fortunate enough to get a scholarship to attend an international school for my last years of high school. So I always had this sort of interest in international work, but, you know, back in the day, it wasn't clear how one went about that, especially as a you know, privileged in the sense of growing up as a middle-class white Canadian, but also not really sure how to navigate the international world. So a friend's father said, go to law school, you know, get a law degree, give yourself some credibility. And so that, but then realizing that a kind of career in corporate law or in doing something in working in a law firm was very, of course, remunerative, but wasn't really getting me what the international side that I was interested in. So I decided to do the Foreign Service exam for Canada with the idea of it being a 5-year plan to get the international experience and kind of contacts, and then go back out into the private sector. And 5 years turned into 7, 10, 15. And then I just ended up sort of moving around different jobs within our Global Affairs Canada, which melds together foreign affairs, trade, international assistance. So it's kind of the umbrella. So in a sense, I didn't have a plan at the outset, but I knew that I wanted a career that had some international component to it. And it just ended up, I ended up being lucky enough that at the time our Foreign Service was looking for people with legal background. And then fortunately, I was encouraged to consider going into trade, even though when I entered our Foreign Service, I really had visions of human rights, some not saving the world in the sort of general sense, or doing kind of classic, I guess, development work and so on. And then it was some both women and men in the department who said, well, actually take a look at trade policy, because if you want to actually have a concrete impact and shape rules and see the results actually of your work, give it a try. I'll be the first to admit that I wasn't necessarily drawn towards trade. I almost had to be pushed into it, and then realized how interesting it really was, and how it did intersect with a lot of the goals that I had, both from a personal point of view, but also from a perspective of ensuring the kind of economic prosperity of Canada, but also shaping rules in such a way that that you hope that the multilateral system was being held up and respected, and that a small but open trading economy like Canada, like New Zealand, like Singapore could actually thrive in that type of network. So it turned out to be quite a rewarding path to go down, but it wasn't one that I automatically put myself into that position. So a bit of, I guess, luck of meeting the right people at the right time in terms of giving me some good advice. And as in Joe's experience, it was men as well as women, and often older sort of hardened trade negotiators who, for whatever reason, decided that they were going to push forward the women, and really were very instrumental in sort of making sure that we were given opportunity. So I feel very fortunate in that regard. And in fact, my first posting as legal advisor at our mission to the WTO in Geneva was a position that didn't exist before, but they decided they were going to create a sort of more junior legal position. And I actually had a sort of a male sponsor mentor who said, this is something that I think you should put your name forward for, and you should go for. And in fact, we're sort of creating it for your type of profile. So, so go for it, kind of thing. In fact, went to battle with, I was supposed to go on another assignment to Brussels, and this male supporter managed to sort of work the arrangement so that I could get out of that assignment and go to this assignment in Geneva, because he felt that was the right, the right fit. So, but that took a lot of, what I'm saying is that I would not have at that stage in my career pushed myself forward in that way. I sort of needed some people more senior to say, yes, we're going to make this happen. And so, trying to pay that forward now, by watching and seeing who's coming up through the system, so that I can perhaps facilitate those opportunities for people coming up behind me. But you asked, Georgette, about how do you sort of juggle, and I think Joe and I have talked about this before, about being experts on an inch deep and a mile wide, although I realize that's the imperial measurements rather than centimeter and kilometer. But I thought about when you asked that question, and really I think what I would say is you need to have a base level of interest and motivation to stay informed and to stay kind of aware, but you certainly don't need to be the expert on absolutely everything. And in fact, in a sense, that's dangerous, because you're removing the the autonomy and the sense of independence and responsibility on the part of people that you work with, to say, you take ownership on this, like, I'm going to be able to get to a certain level, but then I'm going to be relying on you to help fill in the gaps. And so before I came out as High Commissioner, someone said to me, don't fall into the trap of thinking that you're not allowed to ask for things. And so, sometimes I think, and generalization, but sometimes I think women tend to say, okay, well, no, don't worry, I'll do it. And they said, sometimes what you want is actually for your the experts to provide the talking points for you, to work on the first draft of remarks, or to give you the briefing note before the meeting, rather than doing it all yourself, because in the end, you're removing their own pride in their work if you're constantly coming in and saying, oh, I don't need anything from you, I can handle it. So in a way, we're fortunate in I think in often having teams, whether they be in Ottawa or here at the mission, where I can say, I trust you, I'm relying on you, and I'm hoping that you're going to give me the material I need to represent Canada in an appropriate way on this issue. Of course, it depends on the level of trust that you have and you've built with your team. But I think what I've noticed is by really putting the ownership on people then, and thanking them and showing your appreciation, it creates a sort of virtuous circle in a way, and it helps mitigate that feeling of, oh my goodness, I have to know absolutely everything on every topic, because that's just not possible. And I guess the other thing I would say is I think our role often as High Commissioner is to integrate across different issue areas and to see the links. Again, not necessarily to have the in-depth knowledge, but to say, okay, if you're talking about this on the issue of clean technology, well then here's something else that's happening more in the, on the multilateral side of what Canada is doing on climate, or that's an interesting commercial development in this area of technology to increase access to the arts. Did you know that someone else in our cultural and public affairs diplomacy is working with the National Arts Council, and we could connect these two together. So that's often, and that's the fun part of our jobs, I think, is being able to draw those links and connections between all the different issue areas, and then say, okay, now you two talk together, rather than having to fully be, I guess, the authority on it all. So that's a long-winded answer, but I hope that provides some sense.
Absolutely. And sticking on this topic, because it is all about leadership here and the traits and what you bring into this role. Let me ask you a little bit about some of the traits of new leadership. Those things are around empathy, compassion, communication. Are you finding that these are playing a real substantive, significant roles in what you'll do on a day-to-day basis? Joe, if I can ask you that question.
Look, absolutely, and I think brought even more to the fore in this pandemic-ridden world we're in.
Yes.
I know it's a bit of a gross generalization because everyone's style is their own. But I do think women tend to lead in a way that is more inclusive, more compassionate, kinder, perhaps, and tend to rely more on influence and persuasion as a way of getting things done, rather than more assertive or even worse, aggressive type tactics. So I think that at the same time, this doesn't mean being a weak leader at all. I think it's important to not be afraid to be decisive. And again, during the pandemic, I think that's been needed even more, because a lot of us have been going through uncharted territory on a day-by-day basis. We have no reference point really, but we have needed to make decisions, and a lot of those decisions have had to take into account the well-being, emotional, physical, whatever, of our staff members, our teams, and the people we are dealing with. Yes, I do think that styles of leadership have definitely had to change over recent years. The pandemic has accentuated that, but I think it has revealed that that women often have the right sort of leadership qualities to do that successfully in challenging times, and in times where the path forward is definitely uncharted.
Linda, do you have any thoughts about this whole concept of new leadership? And are you finding that, particularly during this pandemic period, and last year especially, that you were finding the way that you were leading, was that changing too?
So I think what I would say is that definitely there's been moments where during the pandemic where, as Joe said, we've been navigating through uncharted territories and having to really exercise judgment without, judgment and decision making without necessarily knowing 100% that it's the right decision, but saying, okay, we're just going to go forward and do this because on the one hand, you're trying to keep kind of some flexibility, but at the same time, I've noticed team members and so on, they like to have the the assurance that you at least are kind of moving things ahead or taking decisions and helping to navigate a path forward, even if you're recognizing that it's going to, it might have to alter or change depending on the circumstances. And some of that, is the matter of how things are communicated and keeping sort of the openness to hearing. Sometimes you don't have an answer or a solution for people, but being able to listen and so they feel that their voice is being heard and their concern is being taken into account. And I would say that sort of sense of I've always had quite a collaborative style of leadership, of sort of taking in a number of views and wanting to discuss things through with a team. So that probably hasn't changed, but maybe has ramped up a bit more when, especially in the early part of the pandemic, where I was relying heavily on team members who had, for example, a lot of like our defense team who have dealt with situations of emergency management and kind of structures and logistics and so on, and I wasn't ashamed to say, like, I need your help to help formulate this or to be a sounding board. But then at the end, I was of course clear that if I take a decision, I will take responsibility for that. I'm not going to throw you under the bus. Again, at the end of the day, I will take ownership over it. But I really am looking for your input and feedback on the way in. And I think in general, as Joe was saying, I think maybe there's obviously it depends on the individual very much, but that sense of the growing importance of EQ in addition to IQ has really been, I think, over the last couple of years, and certainly in the case of New Zealand's Prime Minister, in a very sort of global way, being seen and appreciated that you can lead in a compassionate way, or you can be receptive to the emotional side of what's going on, and that's not a weakness. In fact, that can be a strength. And so I think that's been a very important role model for women in leadership positions to realize you can do that, and you don't have to embody a more traditional, I guess, kind of, if you want to say, more male style of leadership, or a more sort of sense of I'm not letting you see any of my personality or any of my feeling about what the issues are. And I think how Prime Minister Ardern has handled it has been really very revealing for certainly for women in positions of leadership or aspiring to them globally.
I would agree with that completely, and I think again it's been a learning experience for me, not this last year, but more generally, more over a longer period of time, that it was important not to try and lead like a man, quote unquote, that being authentic, true to yourself. And certainly in this last year and a half, letting people understand your own vulnerabilities it has been important to free people up to feel they can be more open about the struggles they might be having and how to kind of overcome them. I also think it's really important to be clear about your preferences for how you work, how you want to work, and to understand other people's preferences as well. To understand what might be going on in their lives at the moment that could be impacting on their mood, their ability to deliver it in a particular way or at a particular time. So there is, I think, there's certainly been learning for me along the way about how to develop that EQ side and to open up more in both directions, both my own and the people who are working for me and with me.
I'm going to jump to a couple of Q&A because they've already come in, and I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions from the floor. The first question, and I think it's actually going to be addressed to yourself, Jo. Somebody, Malika, has research interests in developing technology for taking climate change for tackling climate change challenges. And the question, Jo, is from your experience as a climate change leader, what are some of the climate change challenges that we can mitigate using technology today?
That's a huge question.
There's another session all to itself.
Yeah, because I think technology can play a part in almost all aspects of tackling the climate change challenge. Whether it's big technology like carbon capture, use and storage, whether it is technology associated with digitalization that can help with more kind of precision use of inputs, if you see what I mean, so that you're not overusing resources, whatever they might be. In New Zealand, we've invested an awful lot of money into research on new technology that would help to mitigate the emissions from livestock production, because that's a particular problem for New Zealand. We've been working with Singapore on new technology in relation to future foods, alternative sources of protein that are going to help solve that part of the climate change story. And there's a lot of research going into new forms of energy, of course, as well, whether that's hydrogen or geothermal, solar. Well, we've gone a long way with solar. Electric vehicles and battery technology, storage, issues with renewable energy. I could go on, but I think starting to get more precise about which areas you as a researcher would like to get into, there's a world of opportunity there.
Lynn, I'm going to ask you the next question, and it comes from Deepa. Do you think women in senior positions are doing enough in terms of mentoring other women in their organizations? And I'm assuming this is in organizations, whether it's in a school environment, in the community organizations, businesses, or even foreign service, right? And how, if that's the case, how can women be better mentors?
It's a great question, and I guess I'll give my my personal perspective is that it needs to be a deliberate choice, because it can be quite easy to get swept up in the sort of day-to-day of just kind of trying to do your best best job, and trying to ensure that you're sort of balancing all of your own responsibilities. And so I think one needs to make a deliberate choice to say, I'm also going to take on this role, whether it's for with respect to other women, or whether it's respect to other underrepresented groups who may need some extra I guess support, or where you feel in your organization that there's not a sufficient representation. And as a sidebar, I'll say that this broader question of diversity and inclusion is something that's really come to a head in both in the Canadian corporate sector, but Canadian public service as well, with our clerk of our Privy Council, sort of the head of our public service, saying, he's issued a call to action saying, we all have to do more in this regard. So I think it's really made people say, well, what does that look like, and how can we do it? And I think some of it is in my own experience, you can't necessarily force mentorship. You have to. I've been parts of many different mentorships where they just sort of put two people together, and then you're expected to go off and become great supporters of each other and so on. And frankly, it has to somehow, you can try, but you have to appreciate that it will be a bit organic as well, in the sense that if you overforce a sort of predetermined, these people, and you have to accept that if they click, that's great, and if not, move on and continue to try and find like who would be someone that you can help and support. And often it would be, I guess, in the areas in which you were in your working, your teams, or your I think Joe and I are fortunate, or we were pre-pandemic, to be able to do a lot of networking out in the broader society and so on. And then through those events, you meet a lot of I will say mostly younger, but not necessarily exclusively younger, either women or men who are asking for just a bit of your time, or like a coffee or a chat or a connection on LinkedIn. And what I try and do is say, okay, I'm honest to them as to the extent to which I'm going to be able to devote a considerable amount of time. But I say at the very least, I can meet you and sort of try and sort of facilitate a few connections, or listen to and give you feedback on what you're trying to do. But I'm honest about the amount of time that is available, but being open to that, or open to saying, I'm not the expert in that area, but I'll put you in touch with someone who might be more helpful in that regard. So I think there's a variety of ways one can do that, and then it comes as well to keeping in mind keeping a sort of perspective on, as we're doing internal recruitment and so on, to say, am I looking at the right set of essential criteria? Am I thinking about the way that I'm framing the job requirements? Am I inadvertently excluding a group or a range of people by the way that we're structuring this? And so, just to segue to kind of a broader policy perspective from the Government of Canada, and I think it's likely shared by other governments too, is we now ask that teams do gender-based analysis when they're looking at how are they implementing a policy, how are they running a recruitment, what are they doing in terms of this, and asking them to sort of view it through. And it can sound a bit loosey-goosey, but it's actually quite a systematic process to go through to say, what is the impact on this group of people if we're running it, if we're structuring this recruitment process this way, or if we're implementing a policy that way. So I think there's some techniques and tools that can ensure that as one's building this kind of programs, you can try and do a little bit more better. So I guess my long-winded answer is to say it can go everywhere from just a little bit of personal time and connection building, and to actually thinking about how you're helping to shape broader policies and programs within your organization that can be helpful.
Absolutely. I actually have a question that came in a little earlier on, prior to us starting up, and actually it's addressed to the both of you. So both your countries have designated ministries that oversee gender equality and focus on women, and wanted to get your thoughts on, has this really made a difference? And also, adjacent to that is the question of, whether or not having legislation, government putting in quotas, is that something that should be looked at seriously around the world? Is this this the way to go, particularly ensuring women in senior leadership positions, but especially on boards? Jo,
shall I start? Yeah.
You?
Sorry, now the first part of the question, remind me again. Oh, the Ministry for Women in New Zealand has been around for well over 20 years. I would say it's a yes and no answer in terms of making a difference. In some areas, it has definitely made a significant difference. It does, however, remain a small ministry. It's probably one of the smallest in our series of government departments, and that means it's less able to influence than bigger ministries, obviously. But it has done great work in a number of areas. First of all, building a database and therefore a pipeline of potential board members and ensuring that database is shared when board appointments, particularly in the public sort of area, but not exclusively, when board appointments are being made. It has conducted regular research into things like, STEM, women, young girls and women going into STEM subjects. It has conducted regular research on gender pay and whether there is equality there. There's been slow progress towards closing the gender pay gap, which is persistent for the last few percent. And the third area it's focused on is domestic violence and domestic abuse, which is for New Zealand, like many other countries, a persistent problem. So we haven't got all the answers yet, but I think it is hugely important that there is a ministry for women that does that. In terms of board positions, I'm not a fan of mandated quotas, but having targets, aspirational targets, I think is definitely important, and we are slowly but surely seeing some results along those lines. I've heard that there's a bit of received wisdom amongst some parts of the community that there are not enough experienced leaders out there. We would put more women on boards or in these senior leadership positions if only there were a few more there. Well, it's kind of a catch-22. There are women there, and I think it's important to just break that kind of chicken and egg situation and put the good women who are there in to the roles so they can build the experience and you can build a better pipeline.
Thank you. Lynn, your thoughts, first on the ministry and then subsequently on quotas and women putting women into leadership?
Sure, thank you. Thanks, Georgette, for the question. So similar, we've had a ministry in Canada for quite a number of years. It was formerly status of women, sort of known as an agency in our system as opposed to full ministry. And then in recent years, it's being changed into a full ministry, wage and gender equality, women gender equality Canada. Sorry, we know it as WAGE as the acronym. And this has come about also due to a real push and priority by our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, who holds himself out as a feminist. And so he has put a lot of emphasis behind gender equality, women's empowerment. And so the transformation of wage into a full ministry has been an important part of that. And it briefly stated, and similar to what Joe's explained, is that it sets out a number of areas for action, both looking to see where has progress been made and are there still gaps, and then setting out. And it's all on the website, so anyone that's interested can do a little Google search for wage or women gender equality Canada, and you'll see where there's they set out goals and subject areas from everything from domestic violence to sort of a presence in the business sort of economic side, education, and so on. And then it sets out a kind of state of play of what the current sort of statistics are, what are the actions that are going to be taken, and then it's all tracked both through sort of Statistics Canada and so on. And so really what all that means is it's very transparent, but it also means that the government is being held to account. So if there's areas where there's been no action taken, or where the action taken has proven to be insufficient, or and sometimes we being general, the government, don't get it right. And so what it reveals is if you've had a policy which looks great on paper but doesn't produce any results, well, then maybe you need to adjust and change the policy. So that's been I think it's a very healthy and important development. Is it fully mainstreamed in, or is it still viewed slightly off to the side as a ministry? I'd say that is a work in progress. I mentioned the gender-based analysis, or GBA plus as it's known now, and that's starting to be more understood and used across the different ministries. So less seen as a kind of subset and more integrated into policy development across international assistance policies, foreign policy, defense policy. But people are still, I think, navigating their way through and still learning, what's effective and what works and what doesn't. And bringing it back to the area of trade policy, there's still a lot of questions about, does it work to include gender in trade agreements, for example? Where's the evidence for that? Often we're being asked, why are you doing this? Like, how does that connect and relate? And so, what I'm saying is it's still very much something that we're with, some other countries too, trying to say, well, here's the evidence, here's why we think it's working, but obviously recognizing that there will need to be some probably tweaks and adjustments along the line. On the question of quotas and corporate boards and so on, so we do not have legislation, but what we do have is some regulations that ask for disclosure of diversity data. So, for example, some securities regulators ask that all companies that are publicly listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange have to disclose the makeup of their boards. So, again, it's an exercise in transparency, trying to sort of nudge towards a greater representation of women and visible minorities on corporate boards. And in addition, and sorry, I have to just make sure I get the title correct. The Canada Business Corporations Act also has diversity disclosure requirements for all publicly listed companies. So again, it's not saying you have to hit this benchmark, but it's saying we're watching, and if you have and anyone that's interested in seeing this will be able to watch and see. What's the percentage that we're at right now? I think we're still hovering around 20-24%. It's still not where I would say it should be, but I have a feeling that there's various questions still ongoing about whether the solution for that is legislation, or whether that will bring the sort of actual the results that we're looking for, or is it more a process where through bringing more awareness about the benefits of having diverse boards, you sort of lead by proving the merit as opposed to imposing it through legislation. So so there's been a lot of the kind of publication of the studies that show boards with more diversity have sometimes better outcomes in terms of their financials and their their product, and is that potentially the way to go, as opposed to legislation. So I know, at least I understand, Georgette, that this is an issue being discussed here in Singapore as well. So as always, I think it's useful to have sometimes international exchange and idea sharing on this, because I think it's something that probably a number of our countries are wanting to see a greater number, but still trying to figure out what's the best.
Sorry to interrupt. Where I know we're very, very tight on time, and I know both of you have to leave to your other appointments. So I'm just going to ask the one quick question, 30 seconds, because we have a number of very young ladies in the audience, 18, 19-year-olds, and we've had a couple of questions from them to ask what advice you would have for these young women in terms of, as they aspire to leadership, as they possibly consider a position, a career in international diplomacy. What's in 30 seconds your advice to them? Jo, if I could ask you first.
Okay, in 30 seconds, I would say believe in yourself. Definitely have confidence in your own self, your own abilities. Do not believe in the glass ceiling. I don't believe it exists. And if you believe it does, it'll probably knock up against you. And my third piece of advice is to, if you see an open door, go through it. And you probably will find you like what's on the other side. Excellent advice. Thank you, Jo. Lynn, 30 seconds.
Okay, quite similar. My advice is first, if you're interested in international diplomacy, definitely it's I think it's a fascinating career that's just looking at the geopolitics of the world today and the multilateral system. We need more people that are interested in bridging these gaps and setting the framework going forward. So please, yes, jump in, build networks up, down, sideways, be sort of genuine about what your interests are, and be prepared to do the work, as well, to sort of dive into the issues, be prepared, as sort of be ready that it is a demanding career, but it's a really rewarding one. And then to draw a very Canadian analogy for the Canadians that are listening in, or anyone that's aware that it's the NHL finals right now, and the Montreal Canadiens are in the finals, which is huge for for Canada. Anyway, there's one of our most famous hockey players say, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So I guess I'd leave that as a thought. Great
advice. Thank you so much. Our thanks to both our High Commissioners, Jo Tyndall and Lynn McDonald. Thank you so much for your time, the words of wisdom, and thank you for being a part of this and helping our community of women, chart their way through leadership. So thank you so much, both Jo and Lynn. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
All of you, for all our listeners, thank you so much for participating. We hope you will continue to support us in a variety of different ways. We've got a very quick QR code pop up. If you can, we would love to get your feedback. Let us know what other topics you'd like to hear. If in fact you'd like to participate in some of our events, volunteer, find ways to contribute and be involved. I think that was certainly part of that message that we heard from both our High Commissioners, Jo and Lynn, about being present, participating, going through that door, and absolutely participating in full, being present. That goes without saying. I think Lynn, you wrapped it up really well by saying being in the right time, the right place. It's not just a cliche. It's partly that, but it's also being staying open to the opportunities and grabbing them when they present themselves. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon at our inaugural Dialogue with Diplomats. Again, Lynn and Joe, thank you for your participation, your time, and your continued support and leadership. Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.